It was one of those mornings that felt quiet in every possible way. The air was still, the streets almost empty, and the town seemed half asleep. Officer Daniel sat in his patrol car outside the small cafe he always stopped at before starting his shift. The smell of coffee filled the car as he leaned back in his seat, taking a slow sip and watching the sunrise spread soft orange light across the sky. For a moment it felt peaceful. Just him, the road, and the silence that came before the day really began. He had been doing this job for almost 12 years. He'd seen enough to know that no 2 days were ever the same. Some days were calm and uneventful. Others tested every bit of patience and strength he had. He loved serving his town, but he'd be lying if he said it hadn't taken something from him over the years. The long hours, the late-night calls, the moments that never left his head, all of it weighed on him in quiet ways that no one could see. At home, things weren't easy either. His wife had grown tired of the unpredictability of his job. She said it was like living with a ghost, someone there but never really present. They'd been trying to fix things, but the gap between them seemed to get wider with every argument. His teenage daughter barely talked to him anymore. She said she didn't hate him, but he could see in her eyes that she was scared. Scared of what the world might do to him. Scared that one day he might not come back. That morning, as he checked his gear and looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, he saw the lines on his face and the tiredness in his eyes. He took a deep breath, adjusted his badge, and told himself it was just another day. Whatever came, he would handle it. He started the engine and rolled through the quiet streets, greeting familiar faces as the town slowly came alive. A few shop owners waved from their doors. The baker was already setting out fresh bread. A group of kids rode their bikes down the sidewalk, laughing. For a moment, Daniel smiled. These small things reminded him why he still did the job. Protecting this place, this simple, ordinary town, meant something to him. Around mid-morning, the radio crackled to life. A voice came through, steady but alert. Unit 7, we've got a possible break-in reported at the old warehouse near River Street. No further details yet. Daniel reached for the radio. Copy that. I'm close by. I'll check it out. He turned down the road, heading toward the edge of town. The old warehouse had been abandoned for years, sitting near the riverbank like a forgotten shell. Teenagers sometimes went there to hang out or spray paint the walls, but the call mentioned a possible break-in, which meant it could be more serious. As he drove, Daniel's mind went through the routine: stay alert, assess the situation, wait for backup if needed. But a small part of him, the one that had seen too many unpredictable things, stayed tense. The quiet ride to the warehouse gave him too much time to think. He thought about his wife's words from the night before. One day, your job is going to take everything from you. He had brushed it off then, but now, sitting alone in his patrol car, he felt the weight of those words pressing on him. When he arrived, the warehouse looked just as forgotten as ever. Tall, rusted doors, broken windows, and weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. Still, there was something different today. The side door was open, hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. Daniel parked a short distance away, turned off the engine, and radioed in. Dispatch, I'm at the scene. Side entrance is open. No visible suspects yet. Waiting for backup, but I'll take a look around. He stepped out of the car, hand resting on his holster out of habit, flashlight in his other hand. The air felt colder here. The sound of the river faint in the background. Every step echoed against the ground as he approached the door. He paused for a second, taking in the scene, the shadows, the faint smell of dust and old metal. Inside it was dim, with thin beams of sunlight cutting through the broken roof panels. He could see pieces of old machinery covered in cobwebs, wooden crates stacked against the walls, and scraps of paper scattered on the floor. It was the kind of place where time seemed frozen. Police, Daniel called out, his voice steady but firm. If anyone's here, make yourself known. Silence. He moved deeper inside, scanning the corners with his flashlight. Then he heard it, a faint sound like something being knocked over. His pulse quickened. He stopped, listening carefully. The noise came again, this time a little clearer. It was coming from the far end of the warehouse near where the old storage rack stood. Police, he called again, louder now. Come out where I can see you. Still no answer. He took a slow step forward, then another. His flashlight beam caught something shiny on the ground, a soda can freshly crushed. Someone had been here recently. He crouched to check it, noticing a trail of footprints in the dust leading deeper into the building. Every instinct in his body told him to wait for backup, but he also knew how fast things could change in these moments. Waiting could mean losing whoever was inside. Maybe it was just a teenager playing around. Maybe it was someone running from something worse. Either way, Daniel couldn't walk away. He followed the footprints, his breathing steady, the radio crackling faintly at his belt. Somewhere above him, a pigeon fluttered out of the rafters, making him flinch for a split second. He let out a quiet breath, shaking his head. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself. As he rounded a corner, he caught movement, a shadow darting behind a stack of crates. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. "Stop, police!" he shouted, aiming the flashlight toward the movement. No response. He heard a small crash, like glass breaking, and then silence again. "Show me your hands," Daniel said, his voice firm now, echoing through the empty space. He took a cautious step forward. In the dim light, he saw the outline of someone crouched low. The person looked tense, their shoulders hunched, head down. Daniel couldn't see their face. His flashlight reflected off something in their hand, but the light bounced too fast for him to tell what it was. His training screamed at him to take control of the situation, to keep his distance until he could see clearly. But his human side, the part that didn't want to scare someone who might be innocent, made him hesitate. He spoke again, softer this time. "Listen, I don't want to hurt you. Just stand up slowly and show me your hands. Let's talk, all right?" The figure didn't move. Then suddenly it shifted, a quick, sharp motion. Daniel's heart leapt. It looked like the person was raising something toward him. His instincts fired. His mind went blank except for one thought. Threat. In that instant, Daniel's finger tightened slightly on the trigger, but then he stopped himself. His pulse hammered in his ears and the silence felt deafening. He took one careful step back, his flashlight trembling just enough to show he was scared too. "Don't move," he warned again, louder this time. "Put it down." No answer. The figure froze, hands halfway raised. Then the sound of distant sirens reached Daniel's ears. Backup was finally coming. The figure looked toward the noise, then back at Daniel. For a moment, their eyes met. There was fear there, not aggression. And just like that, the tension in Daniel's chest shifted from fear to confusion. "Stay right there," he said, voice shaking slightly. "Don't do anything stupid." He kept his weapon lowered but ready, heart still racing. The backup cars arrived moments later, lights flashing red and blue through the broken windows. 2 officers entered the building quickly, weapons drawn. The person behind the crates finally stood up, hands in the air. It was a teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, thin and pale, clothes dusty from hiding. He looked terrified, his eyes darting between Daniel and the other officers. Daniel lowered his weapon completely, feeling his stomach twist. The shiny object he had seen in the boy's hand fell to the floor. It was just a piece of metal pipe. The tension that had filled the room slowly drained away, replaced by an uneasy silence. As the boy was led outside, Daniel stayed behind for a moment, staring at the ground where he had been standing. His hands were still trembling. It could have gone wrong so easily. One wrong movement, one faster decision, and everything could have been different. He took a deep breath and stepped out into the sunlight. The day still looked calm, but something inside him had changed. He knew it. That warehouse would stay in his mind for a long time. It was supposed to be just another routine call, just another shift. But as he got back into his car and drove away, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that life had just brushed close to something he couldn't quite name. A thin line between control and chaos, between choice and consequence. And deep down, he knew this wasn't over. What happened today was only the beginning of something that would test him in ways he had never imagined. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that boy. Even after the warehouse had cleared, the image of his frightened face kept flashing in his mind. The way the metal pipe had glinted in the dark, how it could have been mistaken for a weapon, it all replayed in slow motion. He tried to tell himself he'd done everything right. He hadn't fired. He had waited, stayed calm, followed his training. But no amount of reasoning could quiet the uneasy voice inside him that whispered, "What if you had pulled the trigger?" He sat in his car outside the station, staring at the steering wheel for a long time before going inside. The morning light had turned harsh and the coffee on his dashboard had gone cold. He felt heavy, drained, and not just from lack of sleep. Something in him felt different. Inside the station, the usual noise filled the air. Phones ringing, radios crackling, officers talking in short bursts. To everyone else, it was just another busy day. But Daniel moved slower than usual. When his partner saw him walk in, he raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half joking. Daniel managed a weak smile. "Warehouse call." "Just a kid?" "Thought he had a weapon. Didn't. Could have gone bad." His partner nodded quietly. "You did what you had to do." Happens all the time, but Daniel didn't want to hear that. He nodded anyway, pretending to agree, then walked to his desk. The paperwork waiting for him looked endless, but his thoughts were still stuck in that warehouse. Every small sound seemed louder. The tap of a keyboard, the hum of the lights, even the low murmur of conversation. It was like his body was still on alert, still waiting for something to happen. Later that afternoon, he was called into the captain's office. The captain was an older man, calm but serious. He had been through everything: shootouts, investigations, and the kind of public pressure that could break a person. He gestured for Daniel to sit. "Tell me what happened," he said simply. Daniel explained everything from the call to the moment backup arrived. He didn't leave out the part where he almost fired. He was honest about how close it had been. The captain listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, the older man leaned back in his chair. "You handled it well," he said after a moment. "You followed procedure. But I know what's running through your head right now. You're wondering what would have happened if you'd been a second faster." Daniel didn't respond. The captain sighed. "That's the part of this job no one can train you for." The moment after. The questions that never stopped coming. As Daniel left the office, those words stuck with him. The moment after. That was exactly what this felt like. A long, heavy silence after something that could have gone terribly wrong. That night, he didn't go home right away. He parked by the river, the same one that ran behind the old warehouse, and watched the water move slowly under the fading light. The town looked peaceful from there, almost unreal. He thought about the boy again, how young he was, how scared he had looked. What was he even doing there? Was he just wandering? Was he hiding? Daniel didn't know, but something about it bothered him deeply. It wasn't just about nearly making a mistake. It was about how easily fear had taken over in that moment. He prided himself on being calm, on reading people right. But that night had shown him how fast everything could blur when emotions mix with duty. When he finally went home, his wife was sitting on the couch with the TV on low. She looked at him when he walked in, but didn't say much. They had grown used to quiet nights like this. Still, she noticed the look on his face. "Tough day?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said, dropping his keys on the table. "Could have been worse, though." She nodded and turned off the TV. "You want to talk about it?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not tonight." They sat together in silence, and even though she didn't press, he could feel her worry. She had seen this version of him before. The quiet, distant one who brought pieces of the job home even when he tried not to. The next morning, Daniel woke early, the same uneasy feeling still with him. He drove to the station but couldn't focus on anything. The chief investigator called him in to sign reports about the warehouse case. The boy, it turned out, was a runaway. He had been missing for 2 weeks. No criminal record, no gang ties, just a scared kid trying to find a place to hide. Daniel stared at the report in silence. The boy's name meant nothing to him, but the story did. He remembered how the kid's hands had shaken when he came out from behind those crates, how he hadn't said a word, just looked terrified. Later, when Daniel was leaving the office, a younger officer stopped him in the hallway. "Hey, I heard about last night," he said. "Man, that could have gone bad fast." "You did good." Daniel nodded, but the words didn't sit right. Good. Was it good? Or just lucky? As the week went on, the town went back to normal. But Daniel didn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the warehouse again. The shadows, the noise, the way his finger had tensed on the trigger. He started second-guessing everything he did. When a driver ran a red light, he hesitated before pulling them over. When he saw someone walking late at night, he caught himself wondering if they were dangerous or just tired. He tried to hide it, but his partner noticed. "You've been off lately," he said one day during patrol. "You still thinking about that kid?" Daniel nodded. "I just keep seeing it, you know." That moment, I almost made a mistake I couldn't take back. His partner was quiet for a moment. "Everyone's got one of those stories. Some just talk about it less. Don't let it eat you alive, man. But it already was. A few days later, the captain called Daniel into his office again. The department's setting up a follow-up meeting with the kid's social worker, he said. You don't have to be there, but it might give you some closure. Daniel thought about it. Closure. It sounded easy in theory, but he knew it wouldn't be. Still, he agreed. When the day came, he drove to the youth center where the boy was staying temporarily. It was a small building on the east side of town, painted in fading colors. Inside, kids laughed and played in a common room, but Daniel's heart was pounding. He hadn't seen the boy since that night. The social worker, a kind woman with gentle eyes, greeted him. He knows you're coming, she said quietly. He's nervous, but he said he wants to see you. Daniel nodded, following her to a small office. The boy sat there wearing clean clothes this time, but his shoulders were still tense. When their eyes met, Daniel saw the same fear he'd seen before, only softer now, mixed with confusion. Daniel sat across from him, not sure what to say at first. Hey, he finally said, his voice low. I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay. The boy looked down, then nodded. I'm fine, he said quietly. There was a long pause. The air felt heavy between them. I didn't mean to scare you that night, Daniel said. I thought you had a weapon. I was wrong, the boy shrugged. I shouldn't have been there. I didn't know what else to do. Daniel leaned forward a little. Why the warehouse? The boy hesitated before answering. It was quiet. No one bothered me there. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Something in Daniel's chest tightened. He saw himself in that kid, not the same story, but the same feeling. Lost. Trying to find a place that made sense. I'm glad you're safe, Daniel said finally. And I'm sorry for what happened. The boy nodded again, still looking down. You were just doing your job. But Daniel shook his head. That doesn't make it easier. When he left the center, the sky was gray and rain had started to fall. He stood outside for a while, letting the drops hit his face. Something inside him shifted that day. He realized it wasn't just about the warehouse or that one decision. It was about understanding how fragile everything really was. One moment of fear, one wrong choice could change two lives forever. That night when he got home, his wife noticed the difference. He sat down beside her and told her everything, the call, the boy, the meeting, and how close it had all come to tragedy. She listened quietly, then reached for his hand. You did the right thing, she said softly. You showed restraint when a lot of people wouldn't have. He nodded, but deep down he wasn't sure if it was about right or wrong anymore. It felt more like fate had given him a second chance, and he didn't want to waste it. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to see things differently. Every call, every routine stop, he took a little more time to listen, to see the person, not just the situation. His partner teased him for being too cautious, but Daniel didn't mind. He knew now that sometimes being slow, being patient, could save more than one life. Still, the story wasn't over. The news about that night started to spread. Some people praised Daniel for his restraint, while others questioned whether he should have gone in alone at all. The department started an internal review, and though Daniel knew it was standard procedure, he couldn't help but feel uneasy again. He didn't know it yet, but that review, and what came after, would test him more than the warehouse ever did. Days turned into weeks, and though life around the station seemed to move on, Daniel still felt stuck in the same moment. The department had opened an internal review into the warehouse incident. It was routine, they said. Every use of force or potential risk had to be looked into. But to Daniel, it felt like he was under a microscope. Every question, every report made him relive the night again and again. He sat across from the review board one afternoon, their faces serious but expressionless. One of them, a man with a calm voice, asked, "Officer, can you walk us through your decision-making process that night?" Daniel took a slow breath. I followed the call. I found the door open. I announced myself. When I saw movement, I believed the person might be armed. I took cover and gave verbal warnings. I didn't fire because I couldn't confirm the threat. The man nodded but kept writing something down. Did you consider waiting for backup? I did, Daniel said honestly. But I also considered that someone could have been in danger inside. Waiting might have meant losing control of the situation. Another person on the panel, a woman this time, looked up. Do you think you'd make the same decision again? Daniel paused for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. I hope I'd be just as careful. But I also know now how close I came to making a mistake. The room went quiet after that. They thanked him and told him they'd be in touch once they reached a decision. He left the room feeling heavier than when he went in. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something deeper, something that came from realizing how fragile trust could be. That evening, he stopped by the small diner near the edge of town. He used to come there often when he needed time to think. The waitress, an older woman who'd known him for years, smiled when she saw him. "Rough day?" she asked, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. He nodded. "You could say that." "Well, you're still breathing," she said with a chuckle. "That's something." He smiled faintly, appreciating the simplicity of her words. Sometimes that's all you could hold on to, the fact that you made it through another day. As he sat there, staring out the window at the passing cars, he couldn't help but think about how quickly things could turn upside down. He had always believed in doing his job with honesty, in protecting people. But he was starting to see how 1 second, just one, could change how everyone saw him, how he saw himself. When he got home that night, his wife noticed his silence again. She didn't ask questions this time. She just placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Whatever happens, we'll get through it." Those words meant more to him than she probably knew. The next few days were long. Reporters started showing interest in the warehouse case. Someone had leaked parts of the story to the local news, and though Daniel hadn't fired his weapon, the article painted a dramatic picture: "Officer nearly shoots unarmed teen." The headline alone was enough to stir people's emotions. By the end of the week, people were talking. Some defended him, saying he had shown restraint. Others said he was reckless for going in alone. Comments spread online, and soon strangers were judging a moment they hadn't lived. At the grocery store, Daniel could feel the looks. Some people smiled politely. Others turned away. It was subtle, but it was there. The town that had once felt like home now felt uncertain. One afternoon, he went for a walk near the park just to clear his head. He was sitting on a bench when an older man approached him. "You're that cop, right?" the man asked, his tone neutral. Daniel nodded. "Yeah," the man sat beside him. "I read about what happened. I just wanted to say, you did the right thing. A lot of people don't understand how fast these situations happen. It takes guts to hold back." Daniel thanked him quietly. They talked for a few minutes, mostly about life, not police work. When the man left, Daniel felt a little lighter. It reminded him that not everyone was against him, that some people still saw him as human. A few days later, the department finally called him in. The review board had finished its report. The captain met him in his office and handed over the file. "They cleared you," he said. "No disciplinary action. They noted your restraint and professionalism." Daniel exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. But before he could fully relax, the captain added, "That said, the department's recommending you take some time off. Just a few weeks. Clear your head." Daniel didn't argue. He knew he needed it. During his break, he spent more time at home trying to reconnect with his family. He helped his daughter with her school project, cooked dinner with his wife, and even started jogging again. But no matter what he did, part of his mind kept drifting back to the boy in the warehouse. He wondered how the kid was doing now. Was he safe? Was he back with his family? He thought about visiting again, but wasn't sure if it would be welcome. One morning, he got a letter in the mail. It was from the youth center. Inside was a short note, handwritten. "Hi, I wanted to say thank you. I know that night could have gone bad. I'm trying to do better now. They're helping me find a new place to live and go back to school. I hope you're okay too." There was no name signed at the bottom, but Daniel didn't need one. He read the note twice, maybe 3 times, before setting it down carefully on the table. He felt something lift off his chest, a quiet kind of peace he hadn't felt since that night. Later that week, he returned to the station, even though he was still technically on leave. He just wanted to see everyone, to remind himself he still belonged there. When he walked in, his partner greeted him with a grin. "Look who decided to come back to the living." Daniel smiled. Couldn't stay away forever. They talked for a while, catching up on small things. But Daniel noticed how the department had changed a little too. Officers were more careful, more aware of how the public saw them. The warehouse case had sparked discussions about training, about how to handle split-second situations better. It wasn't just about him anymore. It had started something larger. The captain later called him into a meeting with a few other officers. "We're starting a new community program," the captain said. "More outreach, more transparency. We need officers who can bridge that gap between the badge and the people. You've got the experience and the credibility. I want you involved." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Over the next few weeks, he began attending town meetings, speaking to small groups, answering questions from residents. Some people were respectful, others angry. But Daniel didn't shy away from it. He listened even when the words were hard to hear. At one meeting, a woman stood up and said, "We're not against the police. We just want to feel safe too. We want to know that our sons and daughters won't be seen as threats." Daniel looked at her and said quietly, "That night at the warehouse changed how I see things too. Fear doesn't just belong to one side. Everyone feels it. But the only way through it is to talk, to see each other for who we really are." His honesty caught people's attention. It wasn't the kind of speech that fixed everything overnight, but it opened a door. Slowly, people started talking more openly, with him, not at him. Even his daughter, who had once kept her distance from his work, began asking him questions. One evening she said, "Dad, were you scared that night?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Yeah, I was terrified. But sometimes being scared reminds you how much you have to lose." She didn't say anything else, just nodded and gave him a small smile. It was the first real one he'd seen from her in months. As time went on, Daniel began to heal. He started mentoring younger officers, teaching them not just about tactics but about patience, empathy, and understanding. He shared parts of his story, not to scare them but to remind them how real the job could get. Still, every once in a while he'd drive by the warehouse. It was still there, empty and quiet, the door still slightly crooked. He'd sit for a few minutes watching the place and think about how one ordinary call had changed his entire life. He didn't see it as a curse anymore. He saw it as a turning point, a hard lesson but one that made him better, and deep down he knew that the story wasn't completely finished. The world would keep changing and people would keep questioning. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the job wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about understanding humanity in all its messy, complicated ways. That warehouse night would always be a part of him, but now it didn't haunt him. It reminded him that even when everything feels uncertain, there's still room to choose compassion over fear. And for Daniel, that choice had changed everything. The news spread faster than Daniel could catch his breath. By the time he reached home that night, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters wanted statements, neighbors whispered, and people he'd known for years suddenly didn't look him in the eye the same way. His living room felt smaller, quieter, almost heavy. He sat there still wearing his uniform, staring at his reflection in the dark TV screen, trying to replay that one moment again and again. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's face, the fear, the confusion, the blood on the concrete. His mind ran in circles, asking questions with no answers. Why hadn't he waited those extra seconds? Why hadn't he seen the metal pipe for what it really was? It didn't matter that he'd followed protocol. It didn't matter that he hadn't meant to hurt anyone. What mattered now was that a young life had been changed forever, and so had his. The next morning, his chief called him into the station. The atmosphere was tense, every voice lower than usual. Some of his fellow officers nodded in quiet support. Others couldn't meet his eyes. The chief didn't say much, only that an investigation had begun and Daniel would be placed on administrative leave until further notice. When he turned in his badge and gun, his hands trembled slightly. He had always thought of those things as symbols of protection, of trust. Now they felt heavy, like reminders of everything that had gone wrong. Days passed slowly. The story made it to local news, then national. People online argued endlessly. Some defended him, saying he had seconds to decide. Others called for his firing and even jail time. Protesters gathered outside the station, holding signs and shouting his name. He kept the TV off, the blinds closed, and avoided going outside except for groceries. He thought about quitting. He even drafted a resignation letter once, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen. But something stopped him. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a sense of unfinished responsibility. He had taken an oath to serve and protect. And even though everything had gone wrong that night, he still cared about the people in his town, especially the ones who were now angry at him. One evening, there was a knock on his door. He hesitated before opening it. Standing there was a woman he recognized immediately. It was the boy's mother. Her eyes were tired but calm. She looked smaller than he remembered, as if the weight of the last few weeks had shrunk her spirit. "I don't want to argue," she said softly. "I just wanted to see you face to face." Daniel stepped aside and invited her in, unsure of what to say. They sat at the table, the silence thick between them. He started to speak, but his throat closed up. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "My son is alive. That's what I hold on to." Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. "I never wanted to hurt him," he said quietly. "I thought he had a gun. I thought I didn't have a choice." "I know," she replied. "I keep thinking about that too. How fast everything can change." "You had a second to decide, and now we both have to live with that second for the rest of our lives." Her words stayed with him long after she left. That night he didn't feel relief, but he did feel something different, an understanding that pain wasn't one-sided. The boy's family had lost something, and so had he. Neither side could undo it, but maybe somehow they could find a way forward. Over the next few weeks, Daniel forced himself to go out again. He went to the local grocery store, where people still looked at him, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. He attended community meetings, sitting quietly in the back, listening to people speak about fear, anger, and distrust toward the police. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't defend himself. He just listened. What he heard broke his heart. People didn't just talk about him. They talked about how they felt when they saw police lights behind them, how years of misunderstandings had built walls between officers and civilians. For the first time, Daniel saw it from their eyes, not through a training manual, but through raw human stories. He began volunteering at the local youth center, the same place where the injured boy used to hang out before the accident. The first time he walked in, the kids stared at him like he didn't belong there. He felt awkward, out of place, but he stayed anyway. Slowly, over time, they began to talk to him. Some asked hard questions. Some just wanted to know why he became a cop in the first place. He told them the truth, that he'd wanted to help people, that he'd believed being a police officer meant being the good guy. But now, he said, he realized that good intentions weren't enough. You had to listen. You had to understand what people were afraid of and why. Meanwhile, the internal investigation continued. He met with lawyers, attended hearings, and answered every question about that night. Each time he spoke, he relived the moment, the flashlight beam, the shadow, the shot. The board eventually ruled that his actions were within department policy, but the relief he expected didn't come. Instead, he felt empty. Being cleared legally didn't erase the emotional weight. It didn't fix the sleepless nights or the guilt. He began seeing a counselor, something he'd once thought only other people needed. She helped him understand that trauma could live inside you quietly, shaping how you see the world. She told him healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning how to move forward without letting the past control you. As the months passed, Daniel began to rebuild his life piece by piece. The media attention faded. The protests slowed. People stopped whispering as much when he walked by. But inside, he still carried that moment like a scar. One afternoon, he decided to drive past the warehouse where everything had happened. The building was now locked up, windows boarded. He parked across the street and sat there for a while, watching the dust swirl in the sunlight. It looked smaller than he remembered. Time had a way of shrinking even the biggest moments, leaving behind echoes instead of explosions. He thought about the boy again. How scared he must have been. How young he looked, lying there on the floor. Daniel wondered what kind of man the boy might become and whether he would ever forgive him. The thought lingered, both painful and strangely hopeful. After a long silence, Daniel turned the key and drove away, not realizing that this small act, facing the place where it all began, was the first real step toward forgiveness. That night, he called his chief for the first time in months. He said he wasn't ready to come back fully yet, but he wanted to help in some way, maybe through community programs or training sessions. The chief agreed, sounding surprised but supportive. A few weeks later, Daniel stood in front of a small group of new recruits. It felt strange to be back in the station, not as the man who made headlines, but as someone who had something important to share. He told them his story, not the polished version, but the real one. The fear, the doubt, the guilt. He told them that no training manual could prepare you for the weight of a single decision. The room was silent when he finished. He could see in their faces that they understood, maybe even respected him for being honest. That gave him a small sense of peace. Outside, the sun was setting over the town. The streets glowed with orange light, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he could breathe. He wasn't the same man he'd been before that night, and he never would be again. But maybe that wasn't all bad. Maybe change was the point. He had lost his certainty, his confidence, and the illusion that every choice could be clean and right. But in their place, he had found something else: humility, understanding, and a deeper kind of courage. As he walked back to his car, he looked up at the sky, remembering something the boy's mother had said. You did what you thought was right. He didn't know if that was enough, but it was a start, and somewhere deep down, he made himself a quiet promise that no matter what happened next, he would spend the rest of his life trying to turn that one tragic second into something that could make the world a little better, even if it was just one person at a time. Months had passed since the night that changed everything. Life had slowly found its rhythm again, though not quite the same as before. Daniel still woke up early out of habit, but the sound of his alarm no longer meant duty in the same way. It meant another day of trying to make peace with himself. He had returned to work, not as a full-time street officer, but in a new role, training new recruits and helping build bridges between the department and the community. At first it felt strange to be in a classroom instead of on patrol, but over time he realized it was where he was meant to be now. Each week he stood in front of young officers just beginning their careers, their faces filled with the same hope and pride he once had. He told them stories, not the kind found in textbooks, but the kind that came from real life, from the messy, imperfect world of split-second choices and their lasting consequences. He told them that wearing the badge wasn't just about authority, it was about humility. It meant carrying the weight of responsibility even when nobody saw it. It meant being strong enough to admit fear, and human enough to learn from mistakes. Some of them listened quietly. Others asked tough questions, and Daniel answered every one of them honestly. But even as he taught others, part of him still carried that heavy night deep inside. Sometimes, while walking home, he'd catch himself thinking about the boy, the one who almost didn't make it. He'd wonder what he was doing now, how his life had changed. The last time Daniel had seen him was in the hospital, hooked up to wires, barely conscious. The boy's mother had thanked him for visiting, but she had also asked him to give them space, to let time do its work. He respected that. But he never stopped thinking about them. One day, after finishing a long day of training, Daniel found a letter waiting on his desk. It had no return address, just his name written neatly on the front. He opened it slowly, curious and cautious at the same time. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Officer, it began, I'm not sure if you'll remember me right away, but I'm the one you shot that night at the warehouse. It's taken me a long time to write this. I wasn't sure I ever would, but I need to tell you something. Daniel froze. His heartbeat grew louder in his ears as he continued to read. I hated you at first. I couldn't understand why it happened or how my life could change in a single second, because of someone else's mistake. But as I got older, I started to see things differently. I realized you didn't wake up that day planning to hurt anyone. You were scared. I was scared too, and fear makes people do things they can't take back. There was a long pause in the words, a space on the page where the writer had clearly hesitated before continuing. I'm not saying it's all okay now, but I don't want to live angry forever. I'm trying to move forward. I thought you should know that. It was signed simply with a first initial. No full name, no address, just one small letter. But it was enough. Daniel sat there for a long time holding the paper in his hands. His throat felt tight, his eyes blurry. He didn't know whether to cry or smile. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt since before that night. Hope. He read the letter again and again, memorizing every line until he could almost hear the boy's voice in his head. Then he folded it neatly and placed it inside his jacket pocket. It stayed there for days, close to his heart, as if carrying it around somehow made things lighter. A few weeks later, Daniel received another note, this time from the same handwriting. It said the boy, now a young man, wanted to meet. Not to argue, not to reopen old wounds, but to talk. Daniel hesitated at first. Part of him feared that meeting would reopen pain for both of them. But deep down he knew he needed to see him. He needed to look him in the eyes and face the part of his story he had avoided for so long. They met on a quiet afternoon in a public park. The sun was low and the air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass. Daniel arrived early and sat on a bench near the small lake. His hands rested on his knees, fingers twitching slightly. He hadn't felt this nervous in years. When the young man finally appeared, Daniel recognized him immediately. He was taller now, leaner, and carried himself with quiet strength. There was a faint scar near his shoulder, barely visible under his shirt. They exchanged a simple greeting. No handshake at first, just a quiet, unsure nod. For a while they sat side by side without speaking, listening to the sounds of kids playing nearby and ducks splashing in the water. Finally, the young man spoke. "I didn't come here to talk about what happened that night," he said. "I think we've both done that enough in our heads." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. I just wanted to see who you are now," the young man continued. "Because for years I thought of you as just one thing, the cop who almost took my life. But that's not fair. I think maybe you've changed too." Daniel swallowed hard. "I have," he said quietly. "That night changed me completely. I don't think a day goes by when I don't think about it. But seeing you here, hearing your voice, it means more than I can say." The young man looked down at the ground, then back at him. "I'm still trying to figure things out. I had to learn how to walk again, how to trust again. But I'm in school now, studying criminal justice. I guess I want to make a difference too, just in my own way." Daniel blinked, surprised. "You're studying law enforcement?" "Yeah," the young man said with a small smile. "Life's weird like that. I guess I want to help change the system from the inside, make it better." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled the trees, and the world around them felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in years. Then slowly the young man extended his hand. Daniel hesitated for a second before taking it. Their handshake was firm, steady. It wasn't about forgiveness, not completely. It was about understanding, about two lives forever tied together by one moment, now finally sharing peace. When they parted ways, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. As he watched the young man walk away, he realized that redemption didn't come from being cleared in an investigation or hearing others say you did the right thing. It came from facing the pain head-on and letting it teach you something about yourself. From that day on, Daniel threw himself even more into his work. He started new programs for both officers and community members, open discussions, role-play scenarios, real conversations about fear, bias, and human reaction. He made it clear that every decision carried a heartbeat behind it, that every badge and every citizen shared the same fragile thread of humanity. He also visited schools to talk to teenagers about responsibility, choices, and empathy. Sometimes when he told his story, students went silent. Sometimes they asked how he managed to keep going after everything. His answer was always the same: because stopping wouldn't change what happened. But maybe continuing can help someone else avoid the same mistake. Years later, the story of that night still existed online, buried under newer headlines. But Daniel didn't care anymore. What mattered was what he did afterward, the quiet moments, the conversations that planted small seeds of understanding in people's hearts. He still kept that letter, folded neatly in his wallet. Sometimes he'd take it out and read it again when doubt crept in, reminding himself that even broken moments can lead to something good if you're brave enough to face them. One evening, as he left the community center after a long day, he looked around at the town. The streets glowed softly under the streetlights. Laughter echoed from a nearby cafe. Everything felt normal, but in a deeper, gentler way. He smiled to himself, realizing that life rarely gave second chances, but it sometimes gave opportunities to turn pain into purpose. And that was enough. When he reached his car, he glanced at his reflection in the window. He saw the same man, yet not the same at all. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there before, but there was also calm in his eyes. The kind of calm that only comes from walking through fire and coming out the other side. Not untouched, but stronger. He got into the car, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the steady hum. Then he whispered quietly to himself, "You did your best. Keep doing it." And as he drove away under the soft glow of the evening lights, it felt like the end of a long chapter. Not a perfect ending, but a real one. A story of mistakes, forgiveness, and growth. A story of a man who made one split-second decision that changed everything. and spent the rest of his life turning that one moment into a lesson of hope, compassion, and understanding for others.